Okay, so I hooked up this little cheapy MIDI controller I have, and I've actually got this guy set to go on channel 1, which is what the MIDI CV works on by default, but as I said, you can actually go in and modify that to any channel you want, either by programming it through the keyboard or programming it through system exclusive messages, and the manual does have some instructions on how to do that. So you see all I've done is I've got the MIDI cable plugged into the input here. I don't have these labeled because I stuck a label on there and it was peeling off, and I just didn't want to make it ugly, but just the one that's actually closest to the inputs over here and the output is, you know, the MIDI input, and this other connector down here is the MIDI through, and they're right below the pitch and trigger connectors. Oops, just lean on the keyboard. So as you can see right now, it's still working as normally, and the switch, when you flip this switch, all the keys will actually make the same note, whatever the last one they were on was, and that's just kind of a side effect of the way the trigger mechanism works in the keyboard. But at this point, and you could actually, you know, control it with the sequencer and control it with any sort of MIDI type of device. I just plugged this keyboard in just to show easily how it's working. Change the octave on this guy. And I left it programmed by default to a 5-octave mode, and if you read through the book, it basically says if you set it into 4-octave mode, it's a little bit more accurate than it is. You know, it's a standard 5-volt MIDI controller, which is 1 volt per octave, so that's really the maximum it can do is 5 octaves, but that's pretty common for any of these keyboards. So last thing I'm going to show you is this little sequencer that I built over here. I'm going to go ahead and plug that into the triggers just to show you that the old school you know, voltage-based triggers are still working, and I'm going to hook that guy up here in a minute, and I'll show you that piece next. Okay, so now I have my little homemade sequencer plugged in, and this is just something I slapped together from the internet, and I put it in an old bridge box, which most of you guys probably don't know what a network bridge is, but needless to say, no one needed this guy anymore. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it up a little bit, and you can hear. So anyway, as you can see, I've actually had to put it back in the keyboard mode. So you put it in MIDI mode, you just hear the trigger over and over again. Oh yeah, I never showed that the detuning knob here works. And of course, volume. I never. So anyway, I've went ahead and I plugged in, and sorry, let me turn this down for a minute. I went ahead and I plugged in my pitch and trigger into the pitch and trigger on the sequencer that I have here. And it's kind of rigged up because I don't have the right cable to go into a standard instrument jack here, but needless to say, I know how to hook this thing up, so just wanted to show you guys real quick that those were still working. And the last test I have to do, I'm going to go ahead and mute the sound sources out here. Oh, still got the bell tone going. So yeah, another thing to point out too is I've seen people, a lot of people do this. If you got these all turned off, I mean, this is the mixer section, so you basically turned everything off. So if I turn the sound back on, the other thing I'll show you is if you do the cutoff frequency all the way to minimum, you'll hear nothing either. So I've actually seen some people thinking these things don't work because they didn't have the frequencies turned up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the sequencer plugged in. I don't know if it's really necessary. I could probably just do a continuous function, but I'm going to go ahead and plug in an MP3 player into the auxiliary input there, just to show how it can actually modulate any sort of a line level input through the filter. And if any of you guys know anything about modifying these, there's a lot of debate over should you put a capacitor in, should you put a resistor in. And just for the record, I actually put both in. The capacitor will block any nasty AC current that's coming through, DC current that's coming through any of your input sources. And I put the resistor in because it just sounded really brash, and I forget what value I used, but ultimately I used both of them just to kind of make it a little cleaner and not risk damaging the keyboard in any way while using the input source. So let me go ahead and hook that up and I'll show you how that sounds. Okay, here's the last little section of video for this. I actually did go ahead and unplug the sequencers. I forgot to mention, you might have heard it popping a little bit before, and that actually isn't the keyboard doing that. It's the trigger circuit that I have in the sequencer. It's actually not really clean, so it kind of pops whenever it puts some sound through. But I went ahead and plugged in the MP3 player, and like I said, it just plugs into the secondary input here, and I just used one of these splitter cables and just plugged one in just so it wouldn't overdrive it. And hit play on here and play some craft work, of course. Anyway, as you can see, it's actually playing through the keyboard now. And if you notice, you can take the VCF here and crank the signal up and down. So anyway, you get the idea. That's a common modification that I've seen a lot of people do to these keyboards. And I suppose if you've got another keyboard plugged into it, or if you wanted to plug, like I said, just a little mixer and a microphone into it, you can actually use the VCF to modulate your voice. It doesn't actually go through anything else in the keyboard. It's only the VCF. That's why I've got all the tone sources turned off and everything. But ultimately, it's just another little thing to do with that line input that used to be back there. And all it did on the original keyboard was just feed through to the output. I think the whole idea was, there used to be phono jacks back there instead of the instrument jack, I guess the quarter-inch instrument jack, and the whole purpose of that was so that you could plug your tape deck into it and play along. But these days, I don't think anybody really wants to do that with these keyboards. So this is the Realistic Concert Mate MG-1, and a lot of people call it a Moog MG-1 because it was ultimately built by Moog. Let me show you on the back here one other thing I actually noticed that I'd forgotten about. I don't know if you can see it very well, but right here, the plastic is bent up just a little bit on the back of the pitch, and I tried to make that stick down there, but it's bent up a little, so that's another minor flaw with this. But as you can see right there, manufactured by Moog Music, and it's a big Radio Shack keyboard. They sold these sometime in the early 80s, and they were actually kind of expensive back in those days, but these days they're actually coveted for the Moog filter that's built into it, which sounds really nice. Otherwise, I think everything's working really well on this keyboard. And just to remind you, I'm not selling my sequencer or my speaker or any of that other stuff with it. It's just the keyboard, the dust cover I showed earlier, and the manual, which goes along with the MIDI converter that I put in there. And you can go out on the internet and just search for Mini CV, and you'll find information about what this guy does. With the new sliders, new capacitors, all the parts that I put into it, I've probably spent about $150 or a little more than that, probably more like $175 fixing this guy up. But it should last for as long as you don't abuse it too much. It's in really, really good shape. Sounds like new. No scratchiness on any of the sliders. Everything's nice and clean. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and please bid high. Thank you. Bye.